Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to talk about genre, a concept that you're probably familiar with, but I want to offer an alternate perspective on this familiar concept. Before we go any further, I want to define one of the terms that I use on this title page, and that's contact zone. So that was a term that was coined by Mary Louise Pratt to describe the social spaces where cultures meet, clash, and grapple with each other, often in context of highly asymmetrical relations of power. I do this because I want you to begin to think about genres as the borders between different contexts rather than as types or kinds of texts. So first, I want to look at the traditional definition of genre. It's drawn mainly from a literary tradition and looks at genres just as types or kinds of text. Um, this definition is based on a container model, where genres are seen as containers in which works of literature are sorted according to their form and their content in order to organize them, in order to organize the canon. These containers have specific standards and rules. Genres are used to define and clarify kinds of literary texts according to internal thematic and formal relations. So, this traditional view of genre is very prescriptive in the form and content that a text should exhibit. Usually, when teachers use these, they teach these as models to be replicated. Because they're taught as models to be replicated, deviation is perceived as an error. Because of this, any difference is perceived as an error and becomes an obstacle. So that line where genres meet becomes an obstacle and a barrier rather than a border that facilitates exchange. So, some disadvantages to this definition of genre. The first is it's very inflexible. It's rigid in its focus on rules and standards. And because of this, it risks becoming outdated because it doesn't adapt, it doesn't evolve to the reality that our writing reflects. Because they're models to be replicated, difference is an error and thus becomes an obstacle that has to be overcome. You have to bend to meet the standards of the genre. This leaves no space for your own voice in your academic writing. Finally, the third disadvantage with this traditional definition of genre is it's unconcerned with accessibility. It's not concerned with how the standards are met or the rules are followed, just as they are. And when we use these, when we teach these models, we perceive them as preparation. We're giving you tools to use in the future. But more often than not, these tools are confining rather than empowering. So, even though that traditional definition of genre was rooted in a literary tradition, we've updated this to writing genres that deal with specific types and kinds of writing. Now, this is not a literary definition of genre, but it still is very much a traditional definition of genre. So the narrative, the analysis, the evaluation, the argument, these are all specific genres of writing that we teach in freshman composition for specific purposes, with the hope that these genres of writing will prepare you for the writing tasks that you'll be faced with in the future. So before we move on, I want you to do something for me. I want you to, on your cell phone or on your laptop, I want you to Google the word genre. Then, once you've done that, I want you to click on the arrow beneath that first definition that says more information. Below, it should give you the history of the contemporary word genre, the etymology, the lineage of the language. And genre, the word as we know it today, was formed by the combination of two terms in the early 19th century. The French word genre, which means both a type and a kind, and also the process of engendering, and the English word gender, which means the state of being male or female. So the secret to this alternate perspective on genre lies in its origins, in its dual origins. So the emphasis here is on creation. Yes, it still describes categories, types, or kinds, but it's more concerned with how things are created, how they came to be. So, in the early 80s, Carolyn Miller wrote an article called Genres as Social Action. And this started an entire different study of genre theory called rhetorical genre studies. And it was devoted to looking at genre theory that was completely divorced from literary study. One of the first things that Carolyn Miller said in her article was the urge to classify is fundamental. This means that genres are an essential part of the way we attempt to make sense of the world around us. But Miller emphasized that a comprehensive definition of genre should focus on the action they're used to accomplish. Hence, genres are social action. So, defined this way, genres are the response to a recurring situation. When the light changes color, you start driving and others stop. Genres represent the relationship between action and expectation. A better metaphor than the container model of genre is that of family resemblance. Texts don't belong to any given genre. They perform the conventions of genres. And more often than not, they perform the conventions of multiple genres. So, thus, a text can exhibit a resemblance by displaying or performing similar generic conventions to other texts while maintaining its individuality. This resemblance is based mainly on expectation and the meeting of those expectations. So viewed in this way, genres are contact zones themselves. Genres are what meet, clash, and grapple in the contact zone that Pratt describes. So, seen as action, genre describes the relationships between texts and others like it, between texts and the expectations of a text. Looked at in this way, what constitutes a genre is vastly expanded. So the stories your grandfather told you, the notes that you passed in class, are all their own genre. This also means that genres are not fixed but fluid. Because texts perform and usually perform more than one genre, the definition of a genre evolves with each performance of its conventions. This allows genres to evolve with the reality that our writing reflects and not risk becoming outdated, outmoded, impractical, irrelevant. And in this light, your own experiences, both cultural and societal, are their own genres that have given you pre-existing knowledge on what action to take in response to common recurring situations. So, some advantages to viewing genre this way. First, it can help you figure out your relationship to the academy. Writing that performs these genres in addition to academic ones create a more meaningful expression of thought. So performing the conventions of your own personal genres in addition to the conventions of academic ones creates a more meaningful expression of your individual thought. It also allows for the coexistence of both your personal and your formal academic voice in your writing. So your individual voice is incorporated into the academic one that is developing. So therefore your identity isn't lost. You aren't inauthentically trying to mimic an academic model. You're incorporating your own individual unique voice while you're developing this new formal academic one. And it makes place for the personal, for memory in the academic context of academic writing. This definition of genre can also increase your rhetorical effectiveness. Understanding how genres interact in the contact zone where they meet can help make you more rhetorically effective in responding to certain situations. So finally, if you take nothing else away, I want you to know a few things about this contemporary idea of genre. So first, genres are more than models. They're not to be replicated. They're not endpoints, but they're start points. And by that same token, they are fluid. Their definition is never fixed because they have to evolve with every performance of their conventions. This keeps them from becoming irrelevant. This allows them to more accurately reflect the reality represented in our writing. And finally, understanding how they interact can make you more rhetorically effective in your writing. It can help you achieve your purpose faster, more effectively. So, genre isn't a way of describing a type or a kind of thing, but describing how that type or kind came to be. I hope that this was illuminating, and I look forward to the discussion that will follow.